My name is Chris Hauser. I'm the Dean of Science at the University of Windsor, and I'm here to talk about rip currents, the science and safety, and how that may affect people within the Maritimes. Now, I'm a coastal geomorphologist. I study around the world looking at beaches and how they change with storms and how they recover from storms. And for many years, I've been looking at rip currents and understanding how they form, but also how people get into a dangerous situation with those rip currents. I started studying rip currents back in 2008 when I was working on a beach called Pensacola Beach in northwest Florida. We were looking at how sand moved on the beach, and while we were there, a family set up about 100 meters away from us. But rather than getting into the water right there, they decided to change their position. Between us and them was a rip current, and they actually moved their entire family down closer to the rip current and instructed their kids to get into the water at that location. So I ran over, I got the kids out of the water, and I said to the parents, "Why did you put your kids there? Did you not know that that was a rip current?" And they said, "No, we did not know that was a rip current." But they had seen the signs on the beach as they came over, but they didn't understand how to translate that sign into a real-world image. They didn't know what that sign was actually telling them. And it was at that moment that I realized that there was a problem in our understanding of how people use warnings and how that translates to them. They may think, "I've been swimming in the ocean for years. This has never affected me. This will never affect me. I've never seen it in the Maritimes." That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just that it hasn't been very well recorded. Around the world, it is estimated by one of my colleagues that about 4,000 people a year drown in rip currents. And it varies by the country. In the United States, it's anywhere from about 30 to 150, very wide range of estimates because we really don't have a good count. Other places like Costa Rica, it is over 50 people drown per year. A large number of those, on average, are tourists, and many of those are Canadian tourists when they're on vacation. In Canada, the Red Cross says that about 10 people per year on average drown in a rip current. There's actually a relatively low estimate, and I believe that in fact it is too low, and that more people drown per year in rip currents, and that this is being confused with things such as undertow and fast currents. In the Maritimes, we can see that there is a number of ways in which people have documented drownings. For unknown drownings, in particular that are high in New Brunswick, these are ones that people really didn't take into consideration how the drowning occurred. What were the conditions? Were there currents present? Were there waves present? So we really don't know how many people drowned in rip currents that are in this unknown category. The tidal currents are associated with those tidal currents moving up and down the Bay of Fundy. But the others, the fast current, the rip current, and the undertow, I believe are actually one and the same thing. Undertow really does not have an impact. It doesn't pull you under. It is relatively weak, 20, 25 centimeters per second during a large storm. And it is not that dangerous. It is the rip current that is more dangerous. So when people say that they have drowned as a result of an undertow, it is most likely that they had drowned for other reasons, and most likely that of rip currents. Based upon this, approximately up to 7 people drown in rip currents a year in the Maritimes. Now, a rip current is a fast-flowing body of water moving back offshore. It is formed where you have 2 areas of breaking waves and a slightly deeper channel in between. Those breaking waves, when they break, they throw water forward. It piles up at the shoreline in something called setup. That setup has to go somewhere. If there's no break within the sandbar, that setup just simply comes back as undertow, and again, it's relatively weak. But if there is a break within the bar, now instead of the water flowing back offshore, the water flows towards a central point and then out in that current. What you've done is you've taken all that undertow and you've concentrated into a very, very small area, and unlike the undertow, which is at your feet, the rip current is going to be strongest up at the top of the water surface, at your upper body, where you are the most buoyant. So now you have a current pushing towards your upper part of your body. Imagine if a wave came through, it lifts you up, that current pushes you back, and now you may have been pushed back into deeper water than you can now touch. And the moment you no longer have grip on the bottom, you're going to be started to be pushed further and further offshore. So here, the small little video I'm going to show you shows what's happening. You've got breaking on either side, and then you've got this dye, non-toxic dye, being released into the ocean by my colleague Rob Brender at the University of New South Wales. It is then moving straight offshore between those breakers, and it is being taken out by that current. Again, it's the waves breaking, moving water forward. That water then moves to the side into the channel, and it moves out en masse in that large channel. Now, sometimes it can be relatively weak, but other times when you've got a large group of breaking waves, that current can intensify very, very dramatically. Now, one of the ways in which we are able to identify rip currents and where they're located is by this breaking waves. Again, you have a rip current that is this channel between two areas of breaking waves. So what we've done here in this particular image is that we've taken what's called a time stack. We're taking a photograph of the same beach every couple of minutes. And so we're seeing the white breaking waves, and that starts to collapse into a single solid white image. And what you can see in this image here is this area of white, which is the bar and the waves are breaking, and these darker areas where the waves are not breaking and the current is moving offshore. And so in this particular picture, we can see 3 to 4 different rip currents. But I want you to notice that on the beach here, look at how many beach chairs there are. The people who are using this beach were completely oblivious to the fact that there were a couple of rip currents directly in front of them. So we can have multiple types of rip currents. The ones I've been really speaking to this point are called bathymetrically controlled rip currents. This is where the bar is close to the beach, it is slightly attached, it's forcing the breaking, and in between each of those sandbars is that little gap. The breaking is where the water comes on, and then the gap is where the water goes out as a rip current. You can also have what are called flash rips. Flash rips are where you've got this intensified breaking on either side. You may not have a well-defined channel, and they may form over the course of a couple of minutes to an hour, and then they're gone again. These are the least studied and least understood rip currents. Another kind are called structurally controlled rip currents. This is where you have a hardened structure, a pier, a groin, a jetty, or even a rock wall in a natural pond, or natural area, a natural embayment, and that water is being forced up along one side and has to go out, and it moves out along the edge of that structure. The one in this particular image, right on the left-hand side, is that flat, clear, almost calm-looking water that moves out in an arc. That is actually flowing at about 1.5 meters per second in that image. You can also get embayed rip currents, where you've got a small little embayment, the water comes in on either side and then flows out through that central point in the middle. On larger embayments, it becomes more like that structurally controlled rip, and the rip forms on either side of the embayment and moves out along that rocky coast. I imagine you're going to find a lot of embayed type of rips on the rockier coasts around Nova Scotia. You can also get cuspate rips. These tend to form on much steeper beaches with coarser gravelly material, and you've got these little cuspate features on the beach, and there the water accumulates within that cusp and then goes back offshore in that central point. And if you're in that middle point, you're going to be taken off relatively fast, and then you have to find your way back on shore. So the question is, what kind of rips do you have in the Maritimes? And the majority of the type of rips that I've been able to find just by doing a cursory search is that you have a large number of bathymetrically controlled rips. So this picture here, this Google image, is from the north shore of Prince Edward Island on a beach that has a main access point. What you can see in this particular image is a series of small little rip currents along that coast. And these are identified by those smaller, darker little chevrons that you see along that beach. Look at the access point where that road comes out, and right in front of that access point is a series of rips. Now, I'm not suggesting that at this particular beach that there's rips all the time. They will form during when the bars start to migrate back on shore and they attach to the shoreline. They move, those bars move offshore during storms, and the rips will disappear. But then as the sandbars move back towards the shoreline, those rips will form again. So just by flying over here with Google Earth, and being able to see rip currents in this image tells me that this beach has the tendency to form rip currents at certain times of the year, and that caution should be taken. You can also see them as you look along the coast, the northern coast of New Brunswick. And in these images, in particular the one on the far right, has about 24 different rips in an area that is about 5 kilometers long. You also see them continuously throughout the entire north shore of PEI. And you can see them from Cavendish Beach through to many other locations on the island. They are on the island. And while you may not have ever experienced it because of just about the type of waves that were crashing at the time, the position of the sandbars, the beaches do have a tendency to form rips, and you could just be there at the wrong time. And this was the case of Beth Johnson and her son when they were out swimming at a cottage on the North Shore. They went out to that cottage, and then they walked straight out from that cottage. And if I look at this image, you can see evidence that there is about 4 to 5 different rip currents, including one directly in front of that walkway. Now, this image was not taken at the same time that Beth and her son got into the water, but it says that there is the potential for rip current development at that site. And when they got caught, it was the fact that they got caught into a rip current that was directly in front of where they were staying. Now again, not everybody gets caught in a rip current, not everybody needs rescuing, and obviously not everybody drowns. What happens is that it's this combination of what are the sandbars and what are their position, what is the waves at that time, what's the tide, and where are the people, and where are the most vulnerable people. And so you have to overlay these. And so what determines where and when somebody will need rescue or will drown is this combination of the bathymetry, the wave, the wind, the tide, combined then with where people are on that beach, who is at risk based upon their behavior through the day, what time of the day that they go in, or their ability to swim. Now, those people who do get caught in them, many of them can get themselves out, many of them get rescued. But what we have been able to learn is by doing what's called a survivor story, asking people, what was it like to be in the water in that rip current? And so the next video shows you an eye-level perspective of what it's like to be caught in a rip current. And on top of that are some survivor stories telling you about what they were feeling at that time. And so rip survivors understand the dangers of the rips firsthand, and they know that they never want to ever be caught in that rip or in that situation again. And as you look at some of the survivor stories, there's some very common themes. They panicked. They were in this thing. They didn't even know what the flags on the beach meant. In this particular case, the person was from Wyoming and thought that was just simply to tell you the way in which the wind was blowing. Other stories are, I struggled, I tried to fight it, I was exhausted, I was hysterical, screaming, choking, panic. And those are the key pieces. And again, panic, fight against it. It took 2 attempts to get out of it. It's a very common story that we hear of people who are caught in it. As well as, when you look at this image and you're looking at this video, this is again at eye level of somebody in that water with a GoPro on. You're being hit by waves from behind you. You're looking at the shore receding away from you. That panic can easily set in. And that is the most important thing to try and combat. What you need to be able to do is, in fact, relax. Panic is what induces or what leads ultimately to drowning. If you look at what causes drowning, and this comes from the Great Lakes Surf Project, and what drowning looks like, is that you see that people are vertical. And so imagine again that you're caught in a rip current, you were standing on the sand, and all of a sudden a wave picked you up and you got moved back because of that current. The first thing that you're going to do is to try to reach your feet down, to try to touch the bottom again. So you keep a vertical profile, which means that your head is just barely above the water, which forces you to tilt it back. Your mouth is open, you're in a panic state, you're trying to yell towards shore, and because you're still trying to swim, you get into this type of ladder type behavior. And so if you see this, that is usually an indication that somebody is in trouble. So the best way to start thinking about how to survive within a rip current is to get your feet up, to get out of this particular position. Now that's hard, that's easy to say, it may be hard for many people to do, but the ability to get your feet up changes that body position and allows you to begin to float with that rip and not be trying to be sinking underneath it. So the most commonly used statement about how to protect yourself in a rip current is called break the grip of the rip. And this comes from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, from their rip current messaging team. And what it says is that if you're caught in a rip, the first thing that you want to do is not to fight it. Do not try to swim back towards the shoreline, but rather to swim sideways, to move out of that rip current and find footing on the sandbar directly adjacent to it. The key is not to fight it, it's to swim sideways. But as I showed you in that video, from that eye-level perspective of being caught in a rip, when you're caught in a rip, it's hard to figure out what's left, right, up, down, let alone parallel. Where is that water? And to think about getting that action into place. So some of the things that we have done are put in drogues and put in these little sensors and GPS units on top of a float. And we can then watch those rips, we can map them, figure out their overall speed. And so we've done this on many islands. And this particular one that I'm showing you right here, you can see the very dark red area. That dark red area is a rip current that we measured almost at 3 meters per second. That's almost 9 feet per second. That's exceptionally fast. To give you some perspective, Michael Phelps at his fastest time ever in the London Olympics during a burst of speed was 2.1 meters per second. This is far faster than the fastest ever swimmer, which means that nobody can outswim this. No one can fight it. You have to be able to go with it. But what we have learned by doing these drogue studies is that most of the time, rips don't just take you offshore, but many of the times they will bring you right back towards the shoreline, that there's this overall vorticity associated with the water depending upon the configuration of the bars. It'll take you offshore. In many cases, it will bring you right back on to the adjacent sandbars. But you've got to be able to relax and you've got to be able to float. So if you can't break the grip of the rip and swim sideways, what you have to be able to do is float it out, wait till you get into a safe point, and then go off to the side and come back towards the shoreline. So overall, what we have in terms of a rip, and this is some of the most recent study from Castell and others in 2016, is that you have the waves breaking over the sandbar, the water being funneled out the rip, and that there is either this vortex that brings you back towards the shoreline, or in some cases, you're just shot out with a pulse of that rip, and you're out beyond the breakers, but now you're no longer in that current. You're in very deep water potentially. You're not stuck in the current, which means that you can now swim sideways and eventually find your way back to shore. So in this particular example, you have this rip, it'll take you offshore. You can see the surfers in this picture are following that rip out to the sea, and then they're coming back on the sandbar. And that's exactly what will happen. You go out this rip, and most of the time it'll bring you on to the adjacent sandbar on the right-hand side of the screen. Same thing with this one that we've measured on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. It takes you straight offshore. Sometimes it'll pulse you out farther beyond the breaker zone, but most of the time it simply brings you back onshore on either side of that rip current that is directly in the middle. But there are still things called flash rips, and those flash rips are just simply pulses of that water that will take you offshore. They don't necessarily bring you back into shore, so once you get out beyond the breaker zone, you then have to swim to the side and come back towards the shoreline. So the question is, we want to then put on signs on beaches. This would be the one natural thing to do in the Maritimes. We need to put rip current warning signs on beaches. That is needed, and you need to put the signs there. You need to have the flags and the warnings, but it's not a panacea. Signs don't always work. And this is a particular sign that I took a picture of in the southwest corner of Costa Rica. It's on a beach called Estarios, And there you can see the signs in Spanish and English. It's very busy, it's colorful, and the actual graphic in the center is already washed out. It's very difficult to interpret when you get there onto the beach. The reason I took the picture of this is exactly where a bus stopped with a bunch of high school students from the United States. Those students got off the bus. This was the first thing that they actually saw, but 3 of them locked arms and immediately walked into the water and drowned. They saw this sign, but didn't translate it into something that was actually happening there on their beach. The same thing here with a firefighter from Ohio, very fit, could swim, was at this spot, passed this sign, and drowned at this exact location. So for many years, my research group has been looking at what causes people to drown. What do they know about rip currents? And so I've done this at the University of Windsor and previously at Texas A&M University and the University of West Florida. And one of the questions that we commonly ask people is we show them this picture. And we say, where is the rip current in this picture? And what we have found is that most people who look at this photograph get it wrong. In this particular image, the rip current is exactly on the left-hand side. It goes straight up along the groin. It is that relatively flat, calm water on the left side that arcs around. But when we ask people, show me the rip current, the majority of people put it on the wrong side of the groin, and those who did put it on the correct side of the groin put it in the wrong spot. So they were on the correct side, but for the wrong reasons. And some people even put it right at the end of the pier. This means that people had no idea how to spot a rip current, and this was very important to be able to understand. When we showed them the sign that they had walked past, the majority of them had no idea that they had walked past a sign. They didn't even recall seeing it. But when we showed it to them, they said if they had seen it, they would have used that to take precaution. And the most important precaution that they would have taken is that they would have used it to identify a rip. But this sign was never designed for identification. It was designed to tell you how to get out of a rip, how to behave if you're ever caught in that. So there is a fundamental problem. People were using this sign for the wrong reasons. So if I look at a picture of a real rip here, and I compare that to the actual sign, there's some real problems with it. The first is that the beach has the wrong shape. Most of those rips that I've shown you to this point have what's called a cuspate beach, which is this nice little scallop where the beach is indented and then the rip is through the center of it. The other is that the color of the water is wrong. The waves, it actually looks wavier in the rip than it does to the adjacent sides, and it's from the wrong angle. This is from above. Nobody looks at the beach from above. They look at it from the same angle that I've taken this photograph in the background. It's from eye level. It means that the perspective is wrong. So if somebody was trying to use this for interpretation, they were going to be looking for the wrong things. And that's why that family put their kids in the water. It was simply because they didn't know what the sign was showing them, and they had never seen this on the actual beach. So we've gone a little bit further, and we started asking people about what looks safe to them. And we've asked them in particular, does this beach look safe? Now, hopefully after having gone through this presentation, you will know that there is a rip current dead center of that photograph, this relatively calm, flat water. That rip current in that photograph is flowing at almost 1.5 meters per second at its fastest point. But when we showed people this picture, people looked at it and said, no, it doesn't look safe. But when I showed them the next one with people on it, it's the same shot, we just quickly put people onto that beach. That photograph, they said, yes, that one is safe because there are other people on the beach. What we were finding is that you could have a sign, you could have a flag, but if there are other people on the beach and in the water, that trumps the sign. People don't believe the sign because obviously those people in the water are not drowning. Therefore, the beach must be safe. Now I'm going to tell you that the 3 people in the center of that rip in this photograph are trained lifeguards from the Red Cross of Costa Rica, and they're basically locked arms and locked legs so that they don't get knocked over by the strength of that current. this current wasn't safe. And this is what we have found at other locations. This is a beach called Jaco Beach in Costa Rica, and many of you may have traveled to Costa Rica and gone to this particular beach. This is the worst beach for drownings in the country. And it's really bad at this exact location. There's a small little river outflow, and because of that, they put in a little road with a parking lot, and everybody from San Jose, or if they're in the local town and staying at a hotel, this is where they come to. They swim in the little river, and then they go into the ocean. But because of the interplay of the way that the beach is formed and that outflow, the strongest rip is exactly at the location where they are playing. And the majority of people who come to this beach and drown, this is exactly the site, and they typically are 20-some-year-old young males from San Jose, from the city, not from this local area. We've also found this at Pensacola Beach, and we have found that between 2000 and 2008, all of the main drownings happened in 5 locations. Those 5 locations are where the dunes are the smallest, because that's where they put the parking lots. So what happens is when you've got a beach with a lot of rips, it creates a morphology of the beach which makes it very difficult for sand to be transported into the back and ultimately to make a dune. So the managers on this beach realized that the best spot to put a parking lot, the most ecologically sound spot, is to put it where the dunes were the smallest. They put it right there, which means that everybody parks there. That's where they access the beach. But those are also the most rip-prone sections of the beach. It's created by the geology of this island that about every 1.4 kilometers, there is a very kind of permanent rip system. And those happen to be exactly where the parking lots are. Another example on that same island is in 2010 during the summer. What we did is we put a camera on top of a hotel and we took photographs of the beach every minute. And what we did is we counted where everybody was on that beach, and we also looked for rip currents. And so this shows you that there were 3 main rip currents and 1 more off to the side on that beach during the summer of 2010. And those purple areas on the beach that I've highlighted are the concentrations of people. Those are the hot spots of where everybody congregated. Those are exactly coming straight off of the hotel, which means that people were coming onto this beach and we're making a decision based upon convenience, not making a decision based upon safety. You have the same thing at a place called Backpackers Express on Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. This photograph was put together by one of my PhD students. And what you have here, it's called Backpackers Express because right here is a backpackers hostel and the main bus stop. People are backpacking across Australia. They come off the bus, they walk down to the beach, they put their backpack on the beach, and they immediately get into the rip, and many of them need rescue, and several of them have drowned. Or you look at this picture from a resort in Costa Rica. Here I am, I'm coming off that resort, I'm coming out of the pool area, I'm heading towards the beach, and my eyes are immediately tunneled down towards the beach, which happens to have a rip current right at the end of it. The signs off to the left, those blue signs, are actually saying dangerous currents and stingrays. But the color of them, the design of them, makes it almost look like, hey, this is a great swimming spot. Go down this way and you're going to find some swimming. It's the same problem that happened with this particular example. This was an access road because there had been a little tiny creek that will sometimes form, and that combination of the creek and the beach morphology creates a rip right towards the end. And so this was a point at which people were accessing the beach at the most dangerous location. And so we've asked people, including one study that was done in Australia, about how they made decisions. The decisions were based again on convenience and the presence of others. In one example, they're saying that they picked this location because there were other people, including kids, in the water. Another one said that they simply picked this location of the beach because there were girls there. They picked it because they wanted to be there because there were other people, not because there was any idea about safety or danger. We also see this when students study abroad. And while this study is done about students studying abroad, it works the same way for any of you who may be traveling to the Caribbean or to the tropics during spring break. What happens is that a large number of us go to the beach. And when students study abroad, we find that a majority of them visit at least one beach. A large number visit more than one beach. They go in an optional trip with a group of others, which creates peer pressure. They receive no prior warning by their schools, and we don't receive it when we travel down there. None of them, very few took precautions. They chose their beach based upon convenience, or it was recommended to them by a tour operator. Again, safety had nothing to do with it, and none of those students that we surveyed remembered seeing a sign or a warning flag, despite the fact that we know that they went to beaches that had signs and warning flags. They were lost in that moment. It's called tourist brain. You forget that there is dangerous things out there. In many cases, we believe the bus drivers, the tour guides. We ask them, where do you want to go? We want to go swimming. And they'll suggest a beach. They may not have any more knowledge of that beach and the safety of it than we do. They just know that there is a beach there. And that was the case for those 3 students who drowned when they came off of that tour bus in the southern part of Costa Rica. You can see these kind of issues having the potential within the Maritimes. So this is Cavendish Beach. You look at this particular image on Google Earth, it was just this one shot. There is a walkway going over, and that shaded blue triangle is approximately where we would expect people to sit if they were going to go into the water, the most convenient location. On this particular day, that most convenient location is directly behind a rip current. Now, some of you over the last couple of years may have received a survey from one of my students. Her name was Alexandra Scammon, and she is from PEI. And what she was doing was trying to get a better understanding as to what do people believe when it comes to safety. And we showed them 2 images. And we randomly distributed these images. And so we would show them one that was a surf forecast that said, good swimming today, and the same photograph that said, dangerous rips today. Now again, you've seen this photograph. This photograph has a 1.5 meter per second rip current down through the center of it. What we found is the one that said good swimming was believed. The one that was saying dangerous was not believed because there were people in that picture. And what people were saying to us is that it was safe, and they didn't believe the warning because there were people. How could so many people have missed a warning being in a dangerous location? The waves don't look that bad. People are in the water. Again, you can have signs and flags on a beach, but if people ignore them or miss them, then they start to create a group behavior. And it's something called confirmation bias. Is that if I go to the beach today and I see other people there and they're not drowning, I probably won't drown. If I've gone to the beach yesterday and I didn't drown, I won't drown today. And the more that that happens, the more you keep going back and back to the same beach, the more you get a false sense of security that this doesn't have rip currents, this can't happen to me. If they built an access point here, it must be safe. If there is a hotel here, it must be safe. That's what they believe. They would rather believe that than the actual warning sign. And so in order to combat this, you need to have something like the shopping cart effect, a nudge. So you know if you ever go to the grocery store and one person leaves out their shopping cart, everybody starts leaving their shopping cart out because that's the new social norm. But if you start putting your shopping carts away, everybody feels obliged to put that shopping cart away, or if somebody just randomly left one, somebody will pick it up and put it away or take it into the store with them. This is what you need. You need to have a nudge that gets other people to start realizing that you follow the group, and if the group is not in the water, don't go in the water. There's something dangerous there. And the most important way in which you can get that nudge is by having lifeguards. And so here's a perfect example. This beach here, which I referred to earlier, this is called Coqueless Beach on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. It has very dangerous rip currents, some of the fastest ever recorded in the world. But there has never been a drowning here since 2004. And the reason is that the local lifeguard grew up on this beach. He knows this beach. He can spot the rip currents, and he puts those red flags out in front of them every day. And if he even sees you going near that spot or thinking about entering the water there, he will run over and call you out. What they have created on this particular beach is that there are clusters of people within the safe location, and people gravitate towards others on that section. And he's helped to make that happen. The problem is that because there has been no drowning since 2004, the local community is less willing to support financially this lifeguard. Because there's been no drownings, therefore there's no need for a lifeguard. That's the reason why there's been no drownings is because they have a lifeguard, and a great lifeguard. And that's the thing that people get into this false sense of security. One of the easiest things you can do is cut the budget for a lifeguard program because there's been no drownings, no incidents. The reason why there's been no drownings or incidents is because the lifeguards are trained, and that's what they do exceptionally well. So what is needed is really a lifeguard on the most popular tourist beaches and for that type of community support. It's only with having lifeguards and well-trained lifeguards that know about rip currents, who understand the beach, that you're going to be able to address the rip current issue within the region. So as a summary, in order to provide greater protection, you need to have a local understanding. It is people who have been going to that beach for years, who knows how it changed, knows where the rip currents may form, where are the currents formed and under what conditions. You need to have an active prevention through a lifeguard program. You need to think about how the beach is accessed. Where is the access point relative to where the currents are the fastest? That requires some community engagement to recognize that some beaches at some times may have rips and may be dangerous. And ultimately, you then need to have local education. And the best spot to start is at the local high schools, by training the next generation who are going to the beach most frequently to make sure that they're safe and that they're telling others of how to avoid the rip current hazard. Thank you.